There are two options for reaching the ruins of Lennox Castle and Woodhead House. You can park in the valley on one of the side roads of the town and walk up the steep hill, or you can park at the Forestry Commission car park area at the top of the hill and walk down the gravel forest roads. Parking up at the forest means that you can amend your route or visit other nearby places if the weather suddenly changes. The views walking down towards Lennox Town and the castle are arguably some of the best in Scotland. On a clear day, you can see for miles, and if the mist rolls in, it feels very mysterious and almost like it's out of a horror film. There are protected areas of natural native woodland too. One of these houses a large pond, which is marked on the map as a reservoir. There are many wildlife species that live in the water and on the banks of it, so if you're out with the dogs, keep them on a lead on this bit. The pine trees are harvested in sections, so you'll find large areas of ploughed earth, areas of new trees, and then deep sections of old pines. The time it takes to walk down to the castle ruins is around about half an hour, but if you want to take photos or you haven't been before and you're exploring, allow yourself up to an hour because it truly is beautiful down there. Walking down the winding path to the castle feels like you're entering another world. A Victorian world, a quiet world where only birdsong and breezes exist. We have visited the castle many times in the daylight, but I can imagine at night it would be very eerie. You see, Lennox Castle was not just a mansion, it is infamous for being Scotland's largest institution for people with learning disabilities. Some would call it an asylum. There will be a separate video related to the practices that went on in the castle, so for now, let's talk about the history of the building. Lennox Castle is an abandoned shell of a building in Lennox Town, East Dunbartonshire, Scotland. The castle was built between 1837 and 1841 by David Hamilton for John Lennox Kincaid. The area of land it sits on is called Lennox of Woodhead Estate, and the castle replaced an earlier manor called Kincaid House. On the same estate is a second castle from the 1500s, which we will visit later in the video. Lennox Castle is shrouded by woodland, however it wasn't always that way. Many of the early photographs and etchings depict it with trees behind and parkland in front, with other large buildings rolling down the hillside to Lennox Town. In 1927, the castle and its land was purchased by the Glasgow Corporation and converted into a hospital for people with learning and mental disabilities. The hospital opened officially in 1936. There is a misconception that the main castle was used for all sorts of malpractice, when in reality the building was where the on-site nurses made their home, whilst its grounds provided accommodation for about 1,200 patients. There was also a separate maternity unit in operation between the 1940s and 60s. Again, this is sometimes confused with the main castle building, hence there are frequently ghost hunters that arrive to try and catch evidence of disturbed spirits. The red-haired Scottish singer Lulu was one of the babies to be born at Lennox Castle maternity unit back in its heyday. The whole hospital was closed in 2002. Again, we will look at the reasons why in a later video. The castle was already registered as a Grade A listed building since the 1970s, and its current ruinous shell is the result of a terrible fire that ripped through the place in 2008. A year prior to the blaze, some of the land was sold off and converted into Celtic Football Club's training ground. Other sections of land have since been periodically sold off and turned into residential housing. Since our last visit pre-pandemic, more of the ceilings have collapsed in the rooms. There is unfortunately more graffiti, and some masonry has fallen down. It may not look like it due to the moss that covers everything, but in Scotland, the wet conditions mean that within 6 months or so, fresh fallen bricks can look decades old. We do not advise walking within the fenced-off area or approaching the unstable building. On our next visit, we hope to bring out our drone and get some aerial views of a derelict interior.
I think that's as far as I want to go up.
Walking down the majestic stone steps into what was once a formal garden, it feels as if you're stepping even further back in time. There are some very old trees in this wooded area, and it makes a great place to stop for a picnic. On our trip, we didn't have time for that, so we took the short walk to the next historic destination on the estate. Unlike the towering ruins of Lennox Castle, the demure L-plan castle called Woodhead House are not so recognisable today. You may be forgiven for walking past this crumbling monument. By the 1920s, it was irreparable. In its prime, it would have looked similar to this. With the completion of the new Lennox Castle in the 1840s, the question of what should happen to Woodhead arose. Mrs. Lennox Kincaid wanted to plant the main section of the ruin with ivy and other climbing plants and use the arched apartments of the ground floor as an ice house. Her idea was approved. However, the building was not suitable for that purpose. The ruins are now known as Old Woodhead, and they are a hidden gem. Woodhead was built by John Lennox, 6th of Balcorrock, perhaps soon after he succeeded his brother Duncan in the year 1572. The original building was like a smaller version of Torwood Castle. It was L-plan and comprised of a main block and a small stair tower projecting from its corner. It contained 3 stories and an attic. The composition agrees with the date in the latter 16th century, though a number of minor alterations were made in the 17th century. The walls are actually made of random rubble, roughly brought to courses, and the gables, of which only the northeast one survives, have been finished in crow steps. It is truly a romantic, wild ruin, and it makes you wonder what would have happened if Mr. and Mrs. Lennox Kincaid had decided to move into it rather than build a brand new castle. According to the records, they considered Woodhead too lowly for their social standing. After a good couple of hours exploring, it was time to make the climb back to the car park on the other side of Lennox Forest. We ignored the warning signs on the path and just walked back through Lennox Castle overgrown gardens. Once on the main track, we stopped to have a picnic next to a tumble-down bridge which ran across one of the tributaries of the Pow Burn. A little curry, Bertie. Put you down in a minute. Look. Can you see? The single toad that I had spotted on the way down was now with a mate, and there were dozens of pairs all across the stony track. This also happened the last time we were down, so it's clearly the perfect place for them. Toads are a protected species in the UK, and it's great to see them thriving here. We took a slow wander on the steep path up to the car because it was incredibly hot, even though it was only March. I would say the only downside to parking in the forest rather than the town is the fact that it's all uphill after a nice day out. The distance is around the same, and by parking in the forest, you get better views across the campsites and you get to see more wildlife, such as the toads and the birds.